Home Depot recently announced their first quarter financials. And in their earnings call, they described our current industry environment as a storm. Now, I don't completely disagree with that, but where I think they missed the mark is our industry is not in a storm. Our industry is in the perfect storm. Welcome back to the Building the Future podcast. I am your host, Brett Thorne. On this episode, we're going to talk about our current market conditions. We'll start by looking at some of the factors from the past that got us where we are today. What we've gone through in the last 12 months of the present. And then finally, we'll look at some potentials that our industry could experience in the future. To better understand where we are today, we have to first look at the factors that got us here. You turn back the pages of time to well over a decade ago. In the mid-2000s, our industry was experiencing the housing bubble. Unfortunately, that bubble was built on a faulty foundation, and eventually the housing bubble burst. And that sparked the Great Recession. Some of the effects that we felt from the Great Recession: first, our industry went from being overbuilt in new residential construction to where that pendulum swung all the way back, and we now became underbuilt, which is a position we have been in for many years. And second, we had a mass exit from our industry, specifically on the labor side, but also on the supply and manufacturing side as well. So now we're going to fast forward to our current conditions. And the global pandemic created a supply and demand crisis for our industry. We'll first look at the supply side. Let's take the conditions from the past, the underbuilt and understaffed, and now let's add to that additional staffing issues with stimulus money, with increased unemployment funds. We're going to add to it more product shortages because of COVID restrictions and limitations, lack of imports, and the inability to manufacture at full capacity. And now on the demand side, one of the most critical things that this pandemic did to our industry and our country as a whole, it reinvigorated the value of the home. The home was no longer a place you spent just a few hours a day to eat and sleep. The home now became the place you spent days and weeks. It was now the classroom. It was the office. It was the gymnasium. It was the place you raised your family. People had a lot of extra disposable income. And so they invested in their home. They expanded on their home. They looked for new homes. They had a lot of extra disposable income from non-traditional spending such as vacations, meals out, work travel. They also had extra income because of stimulus money. People were leaving crowded metro areas and looking for suburban areas where they could socially distance. Some people were buying second homes or vacation homes as traditional vacation destinations were closing. And lastly, you had record low mortgage rates. All of those things were creating massive demand for an already stressed market. So now we look at the future and the potentials. I think time is truly the only thing that is going to balance out the supply and demand offset that we're currently experiencing. Now, that's ceteris paribus, all other things equal. If this pandemic has taught us anything, though, it is that things can change in an instant. Another thing this pandemic has taught us is that we are now in more of a global economy than we ever have been. So things that happen around the world are affecting us here at home. We also need to be aware of the new infrastructure bill, which, if some or parts of this pass, this is going to require a massive amount of materials and labor. Two things that are already on a supply shortage. First-time home buyer credits. That could get some people that are on the fence about possibly buying a home into the game. Millennials, which is our largest generation group, they are starting families. I think you're going to see some of them moving from their urban living centers out to the suburbs and the exurbs in order to raise and grow that family. You need to look at things like the softwood lumber agreement that, when it expired a few years ago, placed tariffs on building materials that came in from Canada. The Department of Commerce has recently announced that they are going to double down on that and increase the tariffs by the end of the year. This is going to further tax and stress an already high materials market. One other thing to be considering is the new work from home environment and culture that a lot of businesses and corporations shifted to during the pandemic. Many of them are seeing financial benefits from this with lower overhead cost and increased productivity from their employees. So now, when you take all of this information, you've got a low pressure front caused by the past and present supply shortages, and then you've got a high pressure front caused by the present and potential future demand issues, and when those combine, you have the perfect storm. Again, I'm Brett Thorne with the Building the Future podcast. Together we are building the future.